A woman steps down, from the stagecoach, into the middle of the main street, and she does it the way someone does, when they're hiding an injury under a blue travel dress. She walks slow. Not because of the road. Pull back, a whole town the color of red dust, a blacksmith's hammer keeping time somewhere down the block. Men crossing between the general store and the saloon. A few women glance over. Curious. Not unkind. Not yet. Move in closer. A hand gripping one small valise, knuckles gone white around the handle. Too small. Far too small for a woman who has come west to be a wife. In her other hand, a letter worn soft at the folds. Read 40 times. Known by heart. And still the hand shakes. Clothes on the fading yellow bruise along her jaw, almost gone. Visible only if you know where to look. Then a low voice speaks behind her. And she turns too fast, flinching, before she has even seen his face. Silver Creek, Colorado. September 1875. The stagecoach groaned to a stop in a cloud of dust and complaint, and Verity Ashford stepped down, into a town she had never seen, holding a letter she had read 40 times. Her hands were shaking. Not from the road. From something older than the road. She smoothed her travel-worn blue dress, with fingers that knew exactly where not to press. Because underneath the fabric, hidden where decent conversation never reached, were bruises that hadn't finished healing. Wouldn't for a while yet. She'd learned to walk in a way that hid the wince. Learned to breathe shallow when the ribs complained. Learned it the way you learn anything that keeps you alive. Boston felt like another woman's life now. A life with a father who read to her by lamplight. A mother's photograph she still carried. None of the fear that came after. After her father died. After the house went quiet in a different way. After her cousin Victor Pratt decided that quiet house, and the girl living in it, belonged to him. She hadn't asked to be his responsibility. She hadn't asked for any of it. But asking had stopped mattering somewhere around the second time he raised his hand. So when the advertisement appeared in the matrimonial paper, rancher seeks bride, good character, hardy constitution, comfortable home offered in exchange for companionship, Verity had read it 3 times, before she let herself believe it was real. A door. Just a door. She didn't need it to be a good marriage. She needed it to be an exit. She'd used the last of her inheritance on the fair west. Prayed the whole way that Jonas Calloway would be kinder than the man she was running from. It wasn't a high bar. It was the only bar she had. Main Street unrolled in front of her, dust and noise and purpose. Men moved between the general store and the saloon like the town had a heartbeat, and they were all just following it. A few women glanced her way. Curious. Not unkind. Just curious, the way people look at something new that hasn't decided yet whether it belongs. Verity clutched her small valise. Scanned the faces. Wondered which one. Miss Ashford. The voice came from behind her. Deep. Steady. And she turned too fast, flinched before she even saw him, because that's what 2 years, with Victor, had trained her body to do first, and think about later. He didn't move toward her. Just stood there. Tall. Sun-browned. Eyes the pale, warm blue of a sky that's seen every kind of weather, and stopped being surprised by any of it. Mr. Calloway? Jonas. He removed his hat. A small gesture. It shouldn't have meant anything. It meant something. Welcome to Silver Creek. He studied her, not unkindly, not the way Victor used to study her, like she was a problem waiting to be solved, with his fists. How was the journey? Long. A pause. But not unpleasant. The lie came, so easily it frightened her a little. Every mile had been a fresh argument, with her own ribs. But some habits you don't choose. You just have them. Like breathing. Like lying about how much it hurts. Jonas nodded. Seemed to accept it. Didn't press. Wagons this way. About an hour to the ranch. He reached for her valise. This all you brought? Yes. A beat too fast. I travel light. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? He didn't comment on it. Just offered his arm, the way a man offers something he's not sure will be accepted. She hesitated, half expecting him to grab it, half expecting the whole gentle performance to end the second they were out of public view, because that's how it had gone before. Kindness in front of witnesses. Something else entirely once the door closed. But he waited. Patient. Arms still extended. So she took it. They walked toward a sturdy wagon, 2 good horses waiting, and Jonas helped her onto the seat, with a care that made her breath catch. Not from tenderness. From surprise that tenderness was even on the table. She settled onto the hard bench, and the movement pulled at her ribs, and she couldn't stop the small, sharp inhale. You all right, Miss Ashford? Fine. Too quick again. Stiff from the road. His eyes narrowed. Just slightly. Not suspicion exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like he'd seen this particular kind of fine before and knew better than to trust it. But he let it go. Climbed up beside her. Took the reins. And the town fell away behind them. They rode in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable and wasn't quite strained. Somewhere in the middle. Verity studied him from the corner of her eye. Younger than she'd pictured. Maybe 30. Strong hands easy on the reins. A straight nose and a jaw that hadn't decided whether it wanted to smile or stay serious. Ranch isn't fancy, Jonas said eventually, breaking the quiet. But it's solid. 60 head of cattle. Some chickens. 2 milk cows. Enough land to grow when the time's right. It sounds lovely. She knew nothing about ranching. Less than nothing. Her whole life had been Boston parlors, and her father's shipping ledgers, until the ledgers became someone else's, and the parlors became Victor's. You should know something, Jonas said, and his voice shifted. Took on a weight it hadn't carried before. What I'm offering is a marriage of convenience, Miss Ashford. I need a wife for the cooking, the cleaning, running a house. In return you'll have a roof, food, and my protection. He cleared his throat. I don't expect anything more. Unless it's agreeable. To both of us. Something loosened in Verity's chest. Not relief exactly. The absence of dread, maybe, which after 2 years felt almost the same thing. I understand, Mr. Calloway. That's what I expected when I answered the advertisement. He nodded. And they let the silence take over again, the wagon rattling along a trail that unspooled through grassland and sagebrush, mountains rising blue and distant against the sky going gold at the edges. Verity watched the mountains and thought, I don't know this land. I don't know this man. I don't know anything. Except that nobody here knew Victor's name. That, for now, was enough. There it is, Jonas said, pointing. Home. The ranch house sat low and solid against a stand of cottonwoods, a covered porch running the length of the front, a barn and outbuildings scattered nearby like they'd grown there instead of been built. Cattle dotted the far pasture. Simple. Unshowy. Peaceful. Verity hadn't felt peaceful in longer than she could remember, and the word arrived in her chest like something foreign. Untranslatable. A dog came barreling out to meet them, shaggy and brown, and loud with joy. That's Scout, Jonas said. Friendly. Just noisy. Verity managed something close to a smile, as the dog circled the wagon, tail going like a metronome that had lost all sense of rhythm. Jonas brought the horses to a stop, and came around to help her down, and when he lifted his hands toward her, she flinched. Couldn't help it. 2 years of flinching doesn't unlearn itself in one afternoon. Jonas went still. Didn't grab her. Didn't push. Just turned his hands palm up. An offering. Not a demand. Miss Ashford. His voice had gone quiet. If you're hurt, I should know. I'm not. I'm no doctor, he said over her, gentle but unmoving. But Mrs. Holloway up the road has some skill with medicines. I could send for her. No. Too fast. Again. No, thank you. I'm just tired. A night's rest is all I need. He studied her face a long moment. Long enough that she wondered what he saw there. Long enough that she almost told him the truth, right there in the yard, with the dogs still circling, and the sun going down behind the mountains. She didn't. He nodded instead. All right then. And offered his hands again, patient, waiting for her to choose. She placed her hands in his. He helped her down like she was something that might break. And the strange thing, the thing she turned over in her mind long after, was that some part of her had wanted him to grab her roughly. Wanted the confirmation. Wanted to already know what kind of man he was, instead of standing here in the fading light not knowing anything at all. Inside, the house was simple. A main room, kitchen and sitting room combined, a stone fireplace, a sturdy table. 2 doors led off it. That one's yours, Jonas said, nodding toward the smaller room. Mrs. Holloway helped make it up. Washstand. Shelves for your things. A pause. I'll take the other room. Relief again. Quiet and real. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. It's very comfortable. Jonas. Gentle correction. If we're to be married, you might as well use it. Jonas. She tried the name in her mouth. And I'm Verity. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Verity. You hungry? Got stew keeping warm. She was. She hadn't eaten since morning, and the smell reached her before she registered the hunger, and she nodded before her pride could catch up and pretend otherwise. Could I freshen up first? Course. Water's in the pitcher. I'll bring your bag in. She slipped into the small room, while he fetched her valise. Narrow bed, patchwork quilt, pine dresser. A window facing the mountains, the sunset bleeding orange and violet along their edges. He knocked once to deliver her bag. She thanked him, through the half-open door, and closed it the second he stepped back. Alone, her hands started shaking again. She unpacked what little she owned. 2 dresses. A nightgown. A hairbrush. Her mother's photograph, taken before the fever took her, back when Verity was 12, and the world still made a kind of sense. She poured water into the basin. Washed her face. Caught her reflection in the small mirror above the stand, and there it was. The fading yellow bruise along her jaw. Mostly gone now. Still visible, if you knew to look. It was the ones beneath her dress that worried her more. The ones that still ached, with every reach, every twist, every ordinary movement a body wasn't supposed to have to negotiate with. She took a breath. Smoothed her hair. Rejoined him. The stew was simple. Beef, potato, carrot, thick bread on the side. Jonas admitted he wasn't much of a cook, managed the basics, and Verity found she was hungrier than she'd realized, hungrier than pride wanted to admit. They ate quiet for a while. Then Jonas set down his spoon. Thought we might marry Sunday, he said. Preacher comes through once a month. He'll be here this weekend. Unless you'd rather wait. Sunday's fine. A beat. I have no reason to delay. He nodded. Arrange for you to stay with Mrs. Holloway till then. She's the closest thing to a respectable lady in these parts. Wouldn't do for us to be under one roof, before the ceremony. Relief. Followed almost immediately by shame, because here was a man offering her a name, and a roof, and his own careful restraint, and here she was, grateful mostly for the distance. That's very considerate. It's proper, Jonas said, like the word settled something for him. Like properness was a fence he trusted more than he trusted feelings. After supper he walked her, through the rest of the house, the barn, introduced her to the animals, with the patience of a man explaining something he loved to someone he hoped might love it too. She tried to absorb it all despite the exhaustion pulling at her. This would be her home. Her responsibility. Soon. As darkness settled, Jonas hitched the horses again. I'll take you to Mrs. Holloway's now. The ride was short. 10-15 minutes, the Holloway homestead rising up dark and welcoming against the last light. And a woman came out to meet them. Sturdy. Iron-gray hair. Eyes that missed nothing. So you're the bride. She took Verity's hands like she'd known her for years instead of seconds. Sam's been fixing that house up for months, getting ready for you. Verity blinked. Sam? Jonas. The woman corrected herself, laughing. Force of habit. Called him Sammy, when he was 16, and fresh off the wagon train, and I've never quite let go of it. Come in, come in. You must be tired. Yes, ma'am. It's been a long day. Well, come. Mrs. Holloway turned to Jonas. You can bring her bag in, then be on your way. You'll see your bride Sunday. Jonas obeyed, carried the valise to a small, tidy room, and turned to Verity before leaving. I'll come for you Sunday morning. Around 10. Ceremony's at 11. I'll be ready. He nodded once, and left, and Verity stood there in the doorway of a stranger's home, watching the wagon disappear into the dark, feeling something she couldn't name yet. Not safety. Not quite. But the beginning of the shape of it. Mrs. Holloway showed her the room, gave her a nightgown too large for her frame. It'll do for sleeping, she said, and left Verity alone. Undressing hurt. Every motion pulled at something bruised. The marks on her ribs had gone an ugly purple-black. Smaller ones marked her upper arms, memory of Victor's grip during their last fight, the one that sent her running. A soft knock. Brought you warm milk, dear. May I come in? One moment. Verity pulled the nightgown over her head fast, made sure she was covered. Mrs. Holloway entered with the mug. Her smile faltered the instant lamplight caught the bruise on Verity's jaw. Her eyes narrowed. She said nothing. Handed over the milk. Thank you, Verity murmured, not meeting her gaze. You know. Mrs. Holloway settled onto the edge of the bed casual, like she was about to discuss the weather. My husband wasn't always a kind man. Not at first. Had a temper on him. Left marks on me more than once, back when we were young, and I hadn't yet learned to leave a room before it turned. Verity's head came up sharp. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Gentle. Unshakable. Those winces when you move. The way you hold yourself, so careful, like your own body's something you're negotiating with. I know the signs, child. I've worn them myself. Tears came before Verity could stop them. It wasn't Sam. Her voice cracked. If that's what you're thinking. We've only just met. I know that. Mrs. Holloway's hand covered hers. Sam Osborne, Calloway, Lord, I really can't break the habit, is a good man. One of the best I know. But someone hurt you. Recently. Badly. And I'd like to know who. Verity's resolve collapsed like something that had been held together with thread. She sank onto the bed edge, the mug trembling. My cousin. A whisper. After my father died. I had nowhere else. Victor took me in, but he. She couldn't finish it. You're safe now. Mrs. Holloway's weathered hand tightened around hers. Jonas won't hurt you. And your cousin is a long way from here. How can you be certain? The fear that had ridden with her the whole way west finally found words. How do I know Jonas isn't just like Victor, once we're married? Mrs. Holloway didn't answer right away. Consider the question the way you consider something that deserves a true answer instead of a comforting one. Because I've known that boy since he was 16. Fresh off a wagon train, with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a dream of owning land nobody could take from him. I watched him build that ranch out of drought, and blizzard and every kind of hardship this country can throw at a man. Not once, have I seen him raise a hand in anger. Even when he had every right to. I hope you're right. I know I am. A small, firm smile. Now drink your milk. Big few days ahead. After she left, Verity sat by the window, sipping the warm milk, staring at a sky thick with stars she'd never seen from Boston. She'd come west chasing escape. She could only pray she'd found something more. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee, and the sound of chickens complaining about something only chickens understood. Verity dressed in her second dress, gray, travel-worn, seen better days, and found Mrs. Holloway at the stove. "Morning, dear. Sleep well? Better than I have in weeks." "Nonsense, it's a pleasure having company. My Arthur's been gone 5 years now." A plate slid in front of Verity. "Eat up. We've things to do today." "Things? Can't have you married in that dress. We're seeing about something proper." "I'm afraid I don't have the means." "Sam left money." Mrs. Holloway waved off the objection like a fly. "Said to make sure you had what you needed. Practical man. Wants things done right." They hitched the wagon, after breakfast, and made the trip into Silver Creek. The town looked different in daylight. Less like a stage set. More like a place people actually lived. A blacksmith's hammer rang somewhere down the street. A woman swept her porch. 2 boys chased a hoop past the church, laughing loud enough to startle the birds off the roof. Mrs. Holloway greeted the general store owner, a portly man in spectacles, like an old friend. "Morning, Amos. This here's Verity Ashford. Jonas Calloway's bride-to-be. Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Ashford." Amos Whitlock's smile was warm, unforced. "Jonas is a good customer, and a better friend. You're getting a fine husband." "Thank you," Verity managed, still unused to the phrase husband attaching itself to her future. They gathered fabric, ribbons, notions, Mrs. Holloway steering the whole process, with the confidence of a woman who'd outfitted more than one bride in her time. The seamstress, Odile Marsh, a quick-fingered young widow, with a quicker tongue, took Verity's measurements, and paused when Verity flinched at the pressure against her ribs. Bruised herself getting off the stagecoach. "Mrs. Holloway said smoothly. Didn't miss a beat. Gave Verity a look that said, "Stay quiet. City folk aren't used to our rough roads." Odile nodded, unbothered. "We'll have to work fast for Sunday. But it can be done. Something simple. Elegant." By the time they returned to the Holloway homestead that afternoon, Verity was exhausted. And strangely hopeful. The town had been kind. Everyone spoke well of Jonas, without exception, without hesitation. That evening, shelling peas on the porch, Mrs. Holloway spoke again. "You're lucky, you know. Sam could have had his pick of girls from around here. More than one family's tried to catch his eye for a daughter. Then why did he send for a bride?" Mrs. Holloway considered it. "I think Sam's always been something of a loner. Came west alone. Built that ranch alone. Might be easier for a man like that to marry a stranger than court a girl whose whole family he's known for years." A pause. "That, and there's the matter of his sister." "His sister?" Nobody had mentioned a sister. "Lily." Mrs. Holloway's voice softened, the way a voice does around an old grief that's never quite finished healing. "Died about 5 years back. Her husband was a mean drunk. Beat her something terrible. By the time Sam found out, and rode to bring her home." She stopped. It was too late. The chill that ran through Verity had nothing to do with the evening air. "I think that's why he's been so particular finding a wife," Mrs. Holloway continued. "He couldn't save Lily. But he can make certain he never becomes the kind of man who did that to her. No wonder, Verity thought, he looked at me the way he did when I winced. He's seen this before. He's seen where it ends. There's more," Mrs. Holloway added, quieter now. "Before you, Sam was engaged. Girl named Prudence Weller. Sweet thing. Her family owed money to the Calloways, a debt from before Sam's father passed. And when the debt came due, her father called the engagement off. Made her go back east with him. Sam never said much about it. But I know it cut him." A pause. "He let her go, you understand. Wouldn't force a girl to marry, where her heart wasn't given freely, even when it cost him. Verity turned that over slowly. A woman controlled by a debt she never chose. A man who let her go rather than hold her against her will. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a warning wearing the shape of a story. Because debt, Verity thought, is just another kind of hand around a wrist. And she'd know. She'd lived under one kind of grip already. She didn't need Mrs. Holloway to spell out what she was starting to understand. That some cages don't have bars. Some just have numbers in a ledger. He sounds like a good man, she said finally. He is, Mrs. Holloway's eyes met hers steady. Don't let what you're carrying make you doubt that. The letter came the next morning. A boy delivered it to the Holloway door just after breakfast. A thin envelope, Boston postmark, addressed in a careful, lawyerly hand Verity didn't recognize. Her stomach dropped, before she even broke the seal. Dear Miss Ashford, I write on behalf of your late father's estate. It has come to my attention that certain irregularities exist in the handling of funds under your cousin Mr. Victor Pratt's stewardship, irregularities I believe you may hold evidence of, given your residence in his household these past 2 years. I must advise you that Mr. Pratt has recently made inquiries, as to your whereabouts, describing the matter as urgent family business. I do not know what he intends. I only urge you toward caution, and toward keeping whatever knowledge you possess safe, until such time as the estate's affairs can be properly examined. Yours in service, J. Aldous Whitmore, Esq. Verity read it twice. Her hands had gone cold. Which meant he wasn't simply angry that she'd run. Which meant this was never only about a girl who'd embarrassed him by leaving. Because, and the thought arrived slow, ice water finding a crack, because Victor needed her silent. Needed whatever she knew, or whatever he thought she knew, to stay buried. The Bruises had been about control. This was about something else. Something with numbers attached. Something that made a man cross half a continent instead of simply letting a runaway go. She folded the letter with shaking hands. Until Mrs. Holloway found her standing frozen in the hallway. Verity? What is it? Nothing. The lie came fast, automatic, the same reflex that had answered Jonas's every worried question since she stepped off the coach. Nothing important. Mrs. Holloway's eyes went to the letter. Didn't push. Just held Verity's gaze a moment longer than comfortable. You'll tell me. Or you'll tell Sam. In your own time. A pause. But don't carry a thing like that alone, child. Alone is how it eats you. Verity said nothing. Tucked the letter into her valise, beneath the folded nightgown, where no one would think to look. She told herself it was nothing. She knew, even as she thought it, that she was lying to herself now too. Saturday evening, Jonas came to check on the wedding preparations. He spoke mostly with Mrs. Holloway, the church, the Reverend's arrival on the morning stage, but his eyes kept finding Verity across the room, where she set the table for supper, with hands that hadn't quite stopped trembling since the letter. Everything's set for tomorrow, Mrs. Holloway assured him. Your bride has a proper dress. Reverend Cobb's expected in the morning. Good. He turned. You'll stay for supper? If it's no trouble. Through the meal, Verity felt him watching her. Not intrusive. Thoughtful. When Mrs. Holloway stepped out to fetch dessert, leaving them alone, he finally spoke. Are you having second thoughts, Verity? The question startled her. No. Why do you ask? He shrugged, though the shrug looked deliberate, like a man trying to make a heavy thing look light. Big step. Marrying a stranger. I wouldn't blame you for reconsidering. Are you? No. Simple. Certain. I still believe this arrangement can work for both of us. I just want you sure. I am. And the certainty in her own voice surprised her. I want this marriage, Jonas. Something in his shoulders eased. Good. That's good. She thought about the letter folded beneath her nightgown. Thought about telling him. Didn't. Not yet. Not the night before her wedding, with everything else already so fragile, so newly built. She told herself there would be time. Later. When the ground beneath them felt more solid. She didn't know yet how wrong that assumption would turn out to be. The morning of the wedding dawned clear. Mrs. Holloway helped her into the blue dress, simple, elegant. Odile's needle had worked something close to magic, and arranged her hair with white wildflowers. "You look beautiful." Mrs. Holloway stepped back, admiring. "Sam's a lucky man. I'm the lucky one." Verity's voice was soft. "To have found kindness when I needed it most." Mrs. Holloway squeezed her hand. "You deserve kindness, child. Don't ever let yourself forget that." The church was small, white, already thinning of its regular Sunday congregation by the time they arrived, though most stayed, curious to see Jonas Calloway's mail-order bride. Verity walked the short aisle on Amos Whitlock's arm, since he'd volunteered to give her away, and caught sight of Jonas at the altar. Clean black suit. Hair combed. Face freshly shaved. The look in his eyes, as she approached, wasn't quite desire. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe? Understanding, arriving early, before either of them had earned the right to it yet. The ceremony was brief. When Reverend Cobb pronounced them husband and wife, Jonas hesitated only a moment, before leaning down, brushing a chaste kiss against her lips. Their first real contact beyond a handshake. Warmth spread through her that she hadn't expected. Hadn't been prepared for. The celebration afterward filled the hotel dining room. Tables loaded with food, from half the ranches in the county, names and faces blurring together, as the afternoon wore on. By late day, exhaustion pulled at Verity, the strain of a smile held too long, a body still healing asked to perform normalcy for hours on end. Jonas noticed. Announced their departure, with the easy authority of a man who'd been managing a household alone for years. "We should be getting back. Animals to tend. And my wife needs rest, after all the excitement." Knowing smiles followed them out. A few good-natured jokes that made Verity's cheeks warm. Then they were in the wagon, heading home. Their home now, she supposed. The silence between them wasn't strained. Just full. Full of a day too large to talk through yet. When they arrived, Jonas helped her down, with the same careful gentleness he'd shown from the very beginning. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway." The name startled her. Not unpleasantly. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." Inside, Jonas built up the fire against the evening chill, while Verity removed her wedding bonnet, her gloves, the small ceremonial weight of the day. Mrs. Holloway had sent food along, bread, cheese, cold meat from the celebration, and they ate at the kitchen table, Scout snuffling hopefully at their feet, refusing to accept that no scraps were coming. When they finished, Jonas cleared the dishes, waved off her offer to help. "You should rest. Long day." The unspoken question hung in the space between them, thick as the fire smoke. What happens now? They were legally wed. Both knew, without saying it, that they remained, in every way that mattered, still strangers. "I'll turn in soon myself," Jonas said, answering the question she hadn't asked aloud. "Early mornings on a ranch." She nodded. Relief and something like disappointment arrived together, tangled, impossible to separate. "Good night, then." In her room, their room, she supposed, though he made no move to claim otherwise, she changed into her nightgown. Her wedding dress hung on a peg, proof that her life had changed in ways she was still catching up to. A knock at the door. "Verity. May I come in?" Heart hammering, she pulled a shawl around her shoulders. "Yes. Of course." Jonas entered, still dressed, collar unbuttoned, carrying a small wooden box. "I have something for you. A wedding gift." The box was finely made, its lid inlaid, with a pattern of leaves. She approached the dresser, where he set it down. "It's beautiful. Open it." Inside, nestled on soft cloth, lay a silver hairbrush, and mirror set, the handles carved, with the same leaf pattern, as the box. "It was my mother's," Jonas said. One of the few things I brought west. I've been saving it. Verity lifted the brush, reverent. Jonas. It's too much. Nothing's too much. His eyes were dark in the lamplight. There's something else. Something we should talk about. Her stomach clenched. I know someone hurt you. Gentle. Direct. I saw the bruises the first day, helping you down from the wagon. Didn't say anything then. Didn't want to embarrass you. A pause. But I need to know who. Her hands trembled as she set the hairbrush back into its box. For a moment she considered the same lie she'd given the seamstress. The same excuse. But something in his eyes, that mixture of concern and understanding of a man who'd already buried one woman who'd carried marks like hers, made her hesitate. Made the lie stick in her throat. My cousin, she admitted, barely a whisper. After my father died, I had nowhere else. Victor took me in. But she swallowed. He was cruel. When the chance came to marry you, I took it. I had to get away. Jonas's jaw tightened. A muscle worked in his cheek. Did he force himself on you? No. Fast. Certain. No, it wasn't. It was never that. He was just angry. All the time. I never knew what would set him off. A meal not to his liking. A word spoken wrong. Jonas closed his eyes briefly, like the words caused him physical pain. When he opened them, something fierce had settled there. I need you to understand something. He took a step closer, still keeping careful distance. I will never hurt you. Not in anger. Not for any reason. That is not what a man does to his wife. Tears rose hot and sudden. Mrs. Holloway told me about Lily. Sorrow moved through his expression. Lily. Yes. A breath. I was too late for her. But I swore I'd never stand by while a woman was hurt again. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and took her hand. You're safe here, Verity. I give you my word. A tear slipped free. Thank you. He squeezed her hand once, released it. I'll sleep in the other room tonight. Any night you wish it. This marriage doesn't have to be conventional. Unless we both want it to be. Relief and gratitude flooded through her. I think I'd like some time, she admitted. Take all the time you need. He stepped toward the door. We have the rest of our lives to figure this out. Good night, Jonas. Good night, Verity. After the door closed, she sat on the edge of the bed a long while, running her fingers over the silver brush, the fire's last light catching the leaf pattern and turning it gold. For the first time in longer than she could remember, something stirred in her chest that wasn't fear. Not quite hope. She wasn't ready for that word yet. But maybe the beginning of it. She didn't sleep for a while. Because somewhere in the dark, the letter sat folded beneath her nightgown in the dresser drawer, and she thought about Victor's careful, controlled anger, the kind that didn't explode so much as calculate. Thought about the lawyer's careful phrase, irregularities, and what a man like Victor might do to keep those irregularities buried. Which meant this peace, this quiet room, this man who'd just promised her safety, with his whole chest. She didn't know, yet, how long any of it would hold. Until sleep finally took her, somewhere past midnight, the last thought she carried wasn't fear. It was Jonas's voice. I give you my word. She wanted, more than she'd wanted anything in 2 long years, to believe it would be enough. The weeks folded into each other the way weeks do on a ranch. Which is to say, not gently, not slowly, but in a rhythm, so relentless it left no room for a person to sit still, with her own thoughts for long, and maybe that was a mercy. Maybe Verity needed exactly that. Because idle hands remembered things. Idle minutes let the letter creep back into her thoughts, folded beneath her nightgown, waiting. She rose before the sun most mornings. Not because Jonas asked it of her. Because staying in bed felt like wasting something she'd fought too hard to earn. Breakfast first. Then the chickens. Then whatever the day demanded, mending, baking, hauling water that seemed to weigh twice what water should weigh, learning the strange choreography of a household that ran on its own private logic. Jonas rose earlier still, gone to the herd, before she'd even lit the stove, and some mornings she caught herself standing at the window just to watch him disappear into the gray light. Just to confirm he was real. That this whole arrangement was real. Scout became her shadow. Followed her from the coop to the garden to the porch, tail going, utterly unbothered by the fact that Verity still startled at sudden sounds. He never startled at anything. She envied that in a dog, which she recognized as a slightly absurd thing to envy, but there it was. One warm afternoon in late September, Jonas found her at the fence line, watching the cattle graze, with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You'll wear a path in the grass, standing there so long." "I'm trying to understand them." A small, embarrassed laugh. "They all look the same to me." "They don't, once you know them." He leaned against the rail beside her. "That one with the white patch on her flank, that's Delilah. Meanest cow on the place. Kicked a hired hand clean into the water trough 2 summers back. And that one? Clover. Gentlest thing God ever put 4 legs on. Follows me around like Scout does, near enough." Verity studied the herd a moment longer. "I suppose I'll learn them. Given time." "You've got time," Jonas said. Simple. Certain. And something in the way he said it, like time was a gift he intended to make sure she had, settled something loose and anxious in her chest. October brought the roundup. Which meant Jonas gone, from dawn until well past dark, gathering herds with the neighboring ranches, and Verity alone in a house too big for one person's footsteps. She didn't mind the work. She minded the quiet. Because quiet, she'd learned, was where fear lived. Quiet was where Victor's voice found its way back, into her skull, uninvited, reciting all the ways she'd disappointed him. Quiet was where the letter in her dresser drawer stopped being paper, and started being a countdown she couldn't hear ticking, but somehow always felt. She kept busy. Kept her hands moving. Kept telling herself that was enough. On the 4th day of the roundup, the sky changed. She noticed it first, as a wrongness in the light. The gold going gray too fast, clouds stacking themselves up over the mountains like something being built with intention. By late afternoon the wind had teeth in it. By evening, rain was coming sideways, and the temperature had dropped enough that Verity found herself pacing the kitchen floor, arms crossed, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. Until they did. Scout heard it first. Went from lying by the fire to barking at the door in the space of one breath, and Verity was moving, before she'd decided to move, out onto the porch, into rain that hit like small stones. Jonas. Off his horse. Soaked through. Shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with exhaustion that had crossed some line into something more dangerous. Jonas. She was down the steps before she registered leaving them. "Come inside." Now. He let her lead him. Which frightened her more than anything he could have said, because Jonas Calloway did not let himself be led anywhere. Not normally. Not by anyone. Inside she moved fast. Stoked the fire to a roar. Set water boiling. Hauled the metal tub from the corner where it lived, and filled it bucket by bucket, while Jonas stood dripping onto the floorboards, too tired to argue, too tired to do anything but watch her work. "You need to get out of those wet clothes." "Bath's not necessary, Verity, I just need." "It's necessary." Flat. Final. The kind of tone she hadn't known she had, until this exact moment. "Go." He went. By the time he returned in dry trousers and a woolen shirt, the tub was steaming, and the kitchen had gone warm, and close with fire heat and boiling water. He lowered himself in, with a sound that was half groan, half something closer to gratitude. Never been so glad to see 4 walls and a roof. She kept her back to him, busy at the stove, cheeks warming for reasons that had nothing to do with the fire. "The storm came up so fast. I was worried," Nearly lost 2 calves in the creek. His voice tired, threading through the steam. Got them out. Bishop broke his arm when his horse slipped, though. Will he be all right? Doc thinks so. Young. Strong. A pause longer than the last. Made me think, though. If something happened to me out there. He stopped. Started again. You'd be alone here. Verity turned. Forgot, for one unguarded second, that he was still in the tub, submerged to his chest, shoulders bronzed and solid above the waterline, hair curling wet against his neck, and felt her whole face go hot. I'm stronger than I look, she managed, turning back to the stove too fast. Still, you should know how to use a rifle. For hunting if nothing else. And I should teach you the ledgers. The business of the place. In case. 2 words doing an enormous amount of work. I'd like that, she said softly. And meant it. When he'd finished bathing, and dressed in dry clothes, they sat to the meal she'd prepared, his hands still stiff, with cold as he handled his fork. Without thinking, without deciding to, the way the body sometimes moves faster than permission, Verity reached across the table, and took his hands in hers. Rubbed warmth back into them. Jonas went still. First time she'd reached for him first. Your hands are like ice, she said, suddenly aware of what she'd done, unable to stop now that she'd started. You'll never warm at this rate. A slow smile broke across his face. Feel warmer already. They stayed like that. Hands joined across a table gone cold, with forgotten food, something unspoken moving between them that neither one named. Then Jonas squeezed her fingers. Let go. Food's getting cold. And you went to all this trouble. That night, listening to the storm howl against the windows, Verity lay awake turning the evening over in her mind. The surprise in his eyes, when she'd reached for him. The warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. For the first time, she let herself consider, just consider, nothing more, that this arrangement might become something other than an arrangement. The thought frightened her. It also, she noticed, made something in her chest feel lighter than it had in years. True to his word, Jonas began teaching her in the weeks that followed. Not all at once. In pieces, the way a man teaches something he loves to someone he hopes will love it too. An evening with the rifle, out past the barn, where the noise wouldn't spook the herd, his hands adjusting her grip, his voice low and patient. Don't fight the kick. Let your shoulder take it. Easy for you to say. You've done this 100 times. Closer to 1,000. Try again. She missed the bottle on the fence post the first 6 times. Hit it clean on the 7th, and the small, startled triumph on her own face made Jonas laugh. A real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard from him before. There she is, he said. Knew you had it in you. Other evenings, he opened the ledgers at the kitchen table and walked her through the columns. Cattle bought and sold. Feed costs. The slow arithmetic of a small ranch trying to grow into a larger one. She struggled with the sums at first, embarrassed by how little Boston parlors had prepared her for anything useful. But Jonas never once made her feel foolish for asking twice. You catch on faster than you think, he told her one night, closing the ledger. Give it time. Time again. He kept handing her that word like a gift he trusted more than any other. November brought colder mornings, and a strange, comfortable rhythm, chores, and lessons and quiet evenings by the fire, Jonas often reading aloud, from one of the handful of books he owned, while Verity mended, or knitted beside him. Sometimes they simply talked. Traded pieces of their lives the way people do, when trust is being built one careful brick at a time. She learned that he'd come west at 16, after his parents died of influenza, within a week of each other, working as a hired hand on 3 different ranches, before he'd saved enough to stake his own claim. That he built the house himself, 1 room at a time, starting with nothing but a wagon, and a determination that Mrs. Holloway liked to say bordered on stubbornness. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston. Her father's work at the shipping office, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the way he used to read to her, from novels her mother had loved. She didn't talk much about the years after. He didn't ask her to. Christmas arrived white and hushed, the prairie transformed into something Verity had never quite seen from a Boston window. Snow that stretched unbroken to the horizon, no buildings breaking the line, just white and sky, and the dark thread of the tree line, where the creek ran. She threw herself into making it a proper Christmas. Baked cookies from her mother's recipe, the one written in handwriting she could still trace, with her finger like it might bring the hand back. Fashioned decorations from pine boughs and ribbon. Knitted Jonas a scarf in secret, hiding the yarn every time she heard his boots on the porch. On Christmas Eve, home from a gathering at the Holloway place, they stood by the fire, and Jonas produced a small package wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. Merry Christmas! Inside, a silver locket. Simple. Beautiful. When she opened it, a tiny portrait of Jonas looked back at her, from one side. The other side empty. Mrs. Holloway helped me arrange the portrait. Thought maybe someday. He hesitated. Someday we might add yours. Or. A longer pause. A child. When the time comes. Verity's heart skipped in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I've been thinking about it, Jonas said. Starting a family. If that's something you'd want. Someday. The idea of children had always terrified her, before. A body that had learned fear from Victor didn't easily imagine trusting itself to something as vulnerable as motherhood. But here, now, with Jonas's careful, hopeful eyes on hers, the thought arrived warm instead of frightening. I think I would like that, she said softly. Not right away. But someday. With you. His smile, when it came, was radiant enough to outshine the fire. She handed him the scarf, unable to hold back her own small smile, as he unwrapped it. It isn't much. It's everything, Jonas said, wrapping it around his neck immediately, grinning like a boy half his age. Best gift I've had in years. They sat together long, after the fire burned low, shoulders touching, something unspoken settling comfortably between them. She thought, watching the snow fall past the window, that she had never in her life felt this particular kind of quiet. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of a held breath finally allowed to release. January brought cold, that cracked the water troughs, and turned every chore into an argument with the weather. It also brought Ezra Bowman. He arrived on a Tuesday, unannounced, his banker's coat too thin for the wind, his face doing the particular kind of careful that men wear when they've come to deliver news they'd rather not be the one delivering. Jonas met him at the door. Verity, setting the table for supper, caught only fragments through the wall. Ezra's voice low, urgent, Jonas's responses growing shorter and harder with each exchange. Someone's bought the note. Quiet like. Through a lawyer in Denver, no name attached that I could get at. Who's lawyer, Ezra? Don't know. That's what worries me. Whoever it is, they didn't need to buy your paper, Jonas. Bank wasn't calling it. They wanted it. Paid above what it was worth to get it fast. A silence that carried weight even through a wall. When's it due? March. Same as always. But now it's not the bank holding it. It's whoever this is. And banks are patient, mostly. Men who pay extra to buy up a stranger's debt in a hurry? That's a different kind of patient. Verity stood frozen at the table, a fork still in her hand, her pulse loud in her own ears. Because this wasn't about cattle prices. Or drought. Or any of the ordinary hardships a rancher braced for. This was someone. Reaching. From somewhere far away. Into the one place she'd let herself believe was safe. She didn't need proof yet. She already knew, in the pit of her stomach, whose hand this was. Jonas didn't tell her. Not that night. Not the next. She noticed the way he checked the mail himself now, every single time, standing at the window, with the envelopes fanned in his hand like a man counting cards in a game he hadn't agreed to play. Noticed the new tightness around his eyes. Noticed him and Ezra Bowman speaking in low voices at the fence line one afternoon, when he thought she was inside. She said nothing either. Told herself it was, because she was protecting him. From the letter. From Victor's name. From the shape of the fear she'd been carrying since September. Except that wasn't quite true. Which she knew, even as she told herself otherwise. Because the real reason was smaller, and uglier than protection. It was habit. 2 years with Victor had taught her that secrets were safer kept than shared, that the less anyone knew about what frightened you, the less power they had to use it against you. Old habits don't recognize new houses. Old habits just keep doing what kept you alive before. So the two of them moved through February wrapped in separate silences, each one certain the silence was a kindness, each one wrong in exactly the same way. It was during that same stretch of February, gray and cold, and quiet, that Verity found the letters. A hard freeze had cracked one of the boards in the storage room off the kitchen, and Jonas spent the better part of a week repairing it, hauling out old feed sacks and forgotten crates to clear space to work. Verity helped where she could. Which was how she found the box. She hadn't meant to look. She'd only meant to move it, a small wooden chest, tucked behind a stack of old feed sacks, dust thick along its lid. She lifted it to make room for Jonas's tools, and the lid, warped slightly with age, came open on its own. Letters. A stack of them. Tied with a ribbon gone brittle with age. She should have closed the box. Should have set it aside, and told Jonas what she'd found, and let him decide what to do with it. Except her eyes had already caught a name at the top of the first page. Dearest Jonas. Her hands moved before her judgment caught up. The letters were from Lily. Dated across almost 2 years, the handwriting growing smaller, tighter, more careful as the dates progressed. Like a woman learning to take up less space on the page the way she'd learned to take up less space in her own house. The early letters were ordinary. News of a garden. A recipe. A complaint about her husband's drinking, phrased light, almost like a joke. The later ones weren't jokes anymore. Jonas, I don't ask you to come. I only ask that you know. In case there's ever a reason to wonder. And the last one. Undated, the ink gone pale, the handwriting barely holding its shape. If you get this in time, come. If you don't, know that I never stopped believing you would have, if you'd known sooner. Verity sat on the floor of the storage room, with that letter in her hands for a long time. Because now she understood. Not that Jonas had failed his sister. Mrs. Holloway's account, months ago, had already painted that story in broad strokes, arrived too late, buried her instead of saved her, but that it wasn't simple failure. Wasn't distance. Wasn't a man who hadn't tried hard enough. Which meant the truth was worse. Which meant this letter, the last one, the one that mattered most, the one Lily had written believing her brother would come, if only he knew, had arrived 2 weeks after the funeral. Lost somewhere in the slow, indifferent machinery of the postal routes between one territory and another. Sitting in some way station, or some careless postmaster's drawer, while a woman, who needed her brother waited and finally stopped waiting. 2 weeks. Not because Jonas hadn't loved her enough to come. Because a system built of nothing but paper and horses, and men who didn't know what they were carrying had simply failed. Quietly. Anonymously. The way systems do, leaving no one specific to blame, and therefore nowhere for the grief to land except on the man left holding what remained. That was the thing eating him. Not guilt exactly. Something colder. The terror of it, that love could be perfectly real, perfectly ready, and still arrive too late, because of nothing more dramatic than a lost letter. That there was no villain in it at all. Just distance, and delay, and the unbearable randomness of timing. Verity understood, suddenly, with a clarity that felt like cold water down her spine, why Jonas checked the mail himself every single time it came. Why he'd asked, more than once, in a voice too careful to be casual, whether any letters had arrived for the house, while he was out at the herd. She'd thought it politeness. Attentiveness. It wasn't that. It was a man who had learned, in the worst possible way, that the difference between saving someone and losing them forever could be exactly 2 weeks, and a piece of paper that never arrived. She retied the ribbon with careful hands, set the letters back exactly where she'd found them, in the box, in the shadow of the feed sacks, and said nothing to Jonas that night, or the next. Because some knowledge, once you have it, isn't yours to hand back across a table like a gift. It has to wait for the right door to open on its own. The barn burned on the second night of March. Verity woke to Scout's barking gone frantic, and then to a light through the window that shouldn't have been there. Orange. Moving. Wrong. By the time she'd thrown a coat over her nightgown and reached the yard, Jonas was already sprinting toward the smaller stock barn, flames climbing one wall, the cattle inside screaming in a way that would live in her memory for a long time after. The gate, Verity, get the gate open now! She ran. Fumbled the latch, with hands gone clumsy, with panic, got it wide, and stood clear, as Jonas drove the terrified animals out, into the night, smoke rolling black against the stars, heat pressing against her face even, from 20 feet back. By the time neighbors arrived, someone must have seen the glow, and ridden for help, because within the hour half of Silver Creek's ranching families were there, with buckets and shovels, and grim, silent determination. The barn was a loss. But the herd was safe. And the house, God be thanked, untouched. In the gray light of dawn, exhausted, soot-streaked, Jonas crouched at the base of the burned wall, and went very still. Jonas? He held something up. A scrap of cloth, half-burned, caught on a nail near, where the fire had clearly started. Not from a lantern knocked loose. Not from any accident a man could believe in his gut. From a spot too deliberate, too low, too obviously set. This isn't weather, he said, quiet. Flat. Someone did this. Verity's stomach turned to ice. Because she recognized something in that scrap of cloth even before she let herself think it through. A weave, a color, something too fine for ranch work, out of place among the rough canvas and burlap that belonged out here. Which meant someone had been here. Close. Watching long enough to know where to strike, and when. Until Ezra Bowman arrived an hour later, face gray with more than exhaustion, and confirmed the shape of Verity's fear, before she'd said a single word of it aloud. Found a man asking questions in town last week, Ezra said. Fella by the name of Silas Cole. Said he was scouting land. Didn't sit right with me even then. A pause, heavy. Whoever bought your note, Jonas, I'd wager good money he's the one who sent him. Verity's hands had gone cold. Someone wants you ruined before March, Ezra continued. Barn burns. Herd scatters or dies in a fire like that. You default on the note early, and whoever's holding it takes the land clean, no fuss, no fight. Jonas's jaw had gone to stone. Who, Ezra? Who's behind this? I don't know. But Verity did. She stood in the wreckage of the smoking barn, ash settling in her hair, and felt the full shape of it arrive all at once. Victor. Not chasing a runaway cousin out of wounded pride. Chasing an asset. Chasing whatever she knew, whatever paper trail led back to him, and the money that should have been hers, and finding, in the process, an easier and crueler way to make her suffer for leaving. Burn the man's home. Break the man's back. Force her to watch it happen, and know, every single day after, that it happened because of her. She hadn't told Jonas about the lawyer's letter. She hadn't told him about Victor at all, not the whole truth. Only the bruises, only the smallest, safest fraction of it. And now his barn was ash, and his herd had nearly burned alive, and it was, in some way she couldn't yet fully untangle, her fault. Her silence. Her secret sitting quiet in a dresser drawer since September while the danger it warned about had been closing in the entire time. She told him that night. Waited until the neighbors had gone, until the last embers had been doused, until Jonas sat at the kitchen table, with soot still on his hands, and a stillness in his face, that frightened her more than the fire had. She set the lawyer's letter in front of him. "I should have shown you this in September." Jonas read it. Read it again. When he looked up, something had shifted behind his eyes. Not anger at her exactly, but something adjacent to it, sharp-edged and tired. "You knew. This whole time. I didn't know it would come to this." Her voice shook. "I told myself I was protecting you. That if I just kept it small, kept it quiet, it would stay in Boston. Stay in the past. Verity, someone burned my barn. Nearly killed 60 head of cattle. And you're telling me you had a letter since September, warning exactly this kind of man might come looking for you? I know. You should have told me. I know that too." Her voice cracked. "But you didn't tell me either. About the note. About someone buying up your debt in secret. I heard you and Ezra at the door in January, and you never said a word to me after." That landed. She watched it land, watched some of the anger in his face falter, replaced by something more complicated. "I didn't want you frightened. Not with everything else you'd already. And I didn't want you to look at me the way people look at trouble." Her voice broke fully now. "I've spent 2 years being someone's problem, Jonas. I didn't want to be yours too. Not when you'd finally given me somewhere safe to stand." The kitchen went silent except for the fire settling in the grate. "We did the same thing," Jonas said finally, quiet. "Both of us. Thought we were protecting each other. Just made each other blind instead. I'm sorry." "So am I." He reached across the table. Didn't take her hand, just laid his own palm open on the wood, and offering, the same gesture he'd made in the yard back in September, when she'd flinched from his touch. She placed her hand in his. "No more of that," he said. "Whatever's coming, we face it together. Both of us knowing everything. That's the only way this works. Together," she echoed. Outside, the last of the barn's embers glowed faint against the dark, and somewhere out there, in Denver, in Boston, in whatever careful distance he was keeping between himself and the damage he'd ordered, Victor Pratt was still counting on her silence. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the silence had just ended. The morning after the fire, Silver Creek showed up, before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. Wagons first. Then men on horseback, then more wagons, until the yard that had held nothing but ash and scorched earth the night before was suddenly crowded, with neighbors nobody had sent for. Amos Whitlock came, with lumber from his own stores, wouldn't hear a word about payment. The Bishop family arrived, the same Bishop who'd broken his arm back in October, the cast long since removed, though the limbs still moved stiff and slow whenever he reached too high, his wife driving the wagon, while he directed, from the seat, 3 of his boys already climbing down to help, before the wheels stopped turning. Mrs. Holloway brought food enough to feed 20 men for a week, because that was how Mrs. Holloway showed up for anything. With food, and with a look in her eye that dared anyone to say she'd brought too much. Verity stood on the porch, and watched it happen, and felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with grief. Because this was the thing Victor's world had never had. Not real neighbors. Not people who showed up, with hammers and bread, and no expectation of being thanked properly. Boston had drawing rooms, and calling cards, and a very precise architecture of who owed whom. This was different. This was simpler, and larger at the same time, and she didn't have a word for it, yet beyond the one that kept surfacing, unbidden, every time she looked out at the yard. Home. Jonas moved through the crowd directing lumber, thanking men by name, his voice steady in a way that told her he'd learned, a long time ago, how to carry weight in front of people, without letting the weight show. She caught his eye once across the yard. He didn't smile. Just held her gaze a beat longer than necessary, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Together. He'd said it the night before? And here, now, watching half the county rebuild what someone had tried to burn down, the words stopped being a promise, and started being something she could see, with her own eyes. Ezra Bowman came back, that afternoon, and this time his face carried more than exhaustion. It carried the particular grimness of a man who'd spent the morning doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. "Got a name?" he said before Jonas had even finished shaking his hand. "For who's holding your note?" Jonas went still. "Tell me." "Took some doing. Had to send a wire to a fella I trust at the bank in Denver, callin' a favor I've been saving a long while." Ezra's jaw worked. "Note was purchased by a firm out of Boston. Pratt Holdings." Verity, standing near the porch rail, with a basket of nails balanced on her hip, felt the basket slip from her fingers before her mind had caught up to what her ears had heard. Nails scattered across the boards, with a sound like small, sharp rain. "Pratt," Jonas repeated. Turned. Found her eyes. She didn't have to say anything. He already knew. "He's not just looking for me anymore," Verity said, quiet, the words arriving from somewhere cold and certain. "He's coming to finish what he started. And if he can't have me quiet the easy way, he'll bankrupt the man who's protecting you," Ezra finished grim. "Make you watch it happen. Make you feel responsible." Jonas's hand found hers. Steady. Deliberate. "Then he'll find out what this town does to men who come after one of ours." March deepened, and with it came a strange, suspended quiet. The kind that settles over a place right before something breaks. Verity felt it in her body the way she used to feel Victor's moods shift in a room, some old animal instinct she'd hoped Colorado might let her forget. It hadn't let her forget. It had only gone quiet a while. She spent the days helping rebuild the barn, learning the ledgers Jonas had promised to teach her back in that storm-soaked kitchen, practicing with the rifle, until her aim stopped embarrassing her. Small things. Necessary things. Things that felt, in some private corner of her, like preparation for a fight she couldn't yet see the shape of. Which was, she would realize later, exactly what they were. There was one evening in that stretch of waiting that Verity would carry with her the rest of her life, though nothing about it seemed remarkable at the time. Jonas had come in late, from checking the fence lines, tired in the particular way that made him quiet instead of short-tempered, and she'd found him standing at the window, watching the last light fade over the rebuilt frame of the barn. "Regretting any of it?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "The letter I should have shown you sooner. The trouble that's followed me here." "No." He didn't hesitate. Not for 1 minute. He turned to look at her, and something in his face had softened past the exhaustion, past the worry, into something steadier. "I keep thinking about the woman who stepped off that stage last September. Flinching at my hands. Lying about being fine." A pause. "And the woman standing here now, learning ledgers and rifles, and not flinching from a single thing I say to her." "I'm still frightened," she admitted. "Some days more than others. Frightened and standing your ground aren't opposites, Verity. I've been frightened plenty of times in my life. Doesn't mean I stopped standing." She reached up, without quite deciding to, and touched his jaw the way she'd never let herself touch anyone before Silver Creek. He went still under her hand, the way he always did, when she moved first, like he wanted to give her every chance to change her mind. She didn't change her mind. "I'm not frightened of you," she said softly. "I haven't been in a long while now. I think I'd like—" She stopped. Started again, steadier. "I think I'd like this marriage to stop being an arrangement, Jonas. I think I'd like it to be a marriage." Something moved across his face that she would remember on hard days for the rest of her life. Not surprise exactly. Relief, maybe, the kind a man carries so long he forgets its weight, until it finally sets down. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't need to. He simply drew her in, slow enough that she could have stopped him at any point, and didn't want to, and kissed her the way a man kisses something he has waited a long while to be given freely. That night, for the first time since the wedding 6 months before, she didn't return to the small room, with its narrow bed and pine dresser. She stayed. And whatever fear had lived in her body for 2 long years in Boston found, in the quiet of that room, something it had never once been offered by Victor Pratt. Patience. And a hand that only ever asked, never took. In the weeks that followed, something between them settled into a new and steadier shape. The careful distance of the winter gave way to something warmer, freer, a hand at the small of her back, as they crossed the yard, a kiss stolen in the kitchen doorway, before he left for the herd, evenings that ended in the same bed instead of 2 separate ones. It was, Verity thought more than once, exactly the kind of ordinary happiness she had once believed herself unfit for. The note came due on the 15th. Ezra had already warned them. Whoever held it could call it in the moment the date passed, could seize the land, through the courts, before Jonas had time to draw a breath. There was no way to pay it off early. Not with the barn rebuilt, from savings that had all gone into lumber and nails. Not with the herd still recovering its numbers from the fire. So they waited. And the waiting had a texture to it, a held breath, that stretched across 2 weeks, until the 14th of March, when a stranger's carriage rolled into Silver Creek and stopped in front of the bank. Verity was in the general store when word reached her. Amos Whitlock's face going pale, the bell over the door still swinging, from whoever had run in to tell him. "Man just arrived," Amos said. "Fancy carriage. Boston plates on the trunk. Asking for directions to the bank, and asking after a Miss Verity Ashford like he had every right in the world to the name." Her whole body went cold. Because she knew, before she'd even stepped outside, before she'd even seen him climb down from that carriage, with his gloves too clean, and his coat too fine for a town like this one. She knew the shape of him in her bones the way you know weather coming. Victor. She stood in the doorway of the general store, and watched him cross the street toward the bank, cane in hand, though he never needed one, using it the way he'd always used everything. As a prop for a performance of respectability, that had nothing underneath it, but cruelty and careful math. Word moved through Silver Creek faster than the man himself. By the time Victor reached the bank steps, half the town had found some reason to be nearby. Amos had abandoned his register. The Bishops had ridden in, from their ranch on some pretext or another. Mrs. Holloway appeared at Verity's elbow like she'd been summoned by will alone, her hand finding Verity's, gripping tight. "You don't have to face him alone," she said. "Not here. Not ever again." Verity's throat had closed too tight to answer. She only nodded. Jonas arrived at a dead run, having ridden in from the ranch the moment word reached him, and reached the bank steps just as Victor turned to address the small crowd that had gathered, with the easy, practiced smile of a man who never once doubted his own charm. "Ladies, gentlemen," Victor's voice carried, cultured, unhurried. "I apologize for the intrusion. I've come rather a long way on a matter of family business." His eyes found Verity across the crowd, and something in his expression sharpened, private and cold beneath the public warmth. "My cousin left home under difficult circumstances. I've come to see her safely return to her responsibilities." "She has no responsibilities to you," Jonas said, stepping forward, his voice carrying its own kind of weight. Not loud, but final, the way a closing door is final. "She's my wife." Victor's smile didn't waver. That was the worst part, Verity thought. It never wavered. "Mr. Calloway, I presume. I confess I hold your note. A small business matter, unconnected to family, I assure you." A pause, deliberate as a blade laid flat, before the turn. "Though I'd hate for that note to become complicated. If certain family matters aren't resolved amicably." "Say what you mean," Jonas said. Victor's gaze slid to Verity. "I mean that my cousin holds documents belonging to her late father's estate. Documents she removed, without authority before her hasty departure. I'm prepared to be generous about the note, Mr. Calloway, generous indeed, if those documents are returned, and my cousin signs a simple release of any further claim on the estate." His voice softened, performing reasonableness for the crowd like a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed the whole way from Boston. I only want what's rightfully mine returned. And my cousin's safe return home, where her family can properly care for her. She is home, Jonas said. And I'd wager whatever documents you're so eager to have back are the very ones proving you stole from her. A ripple moved through the gathered crowd. Verity felt it, felt the town's attention sharpen, felt Amos Whitlock's eyes narrow, felt Mrs. Holloway's grip on her hand tighten further. Victor's composure cracked, just slightly, just at the edges. That's a serious accusation, sir, to make in public with no. I have proof. The words left Verity's mouth, before she'd fully decided to speak them. Every head turned. Victor's smile finally, fully failed. Verity. His voice dropped, the public warmth gone entirely now, replaced by something she recognized, from 100 closed doors in Boston. Don't do this. I've spent 2 years doing what you told me to do. Her voice shook, but it didn't stop. Not this time. She'd carried the letter, with her every day, since the barn burned. Folded now not out of fear, but out of readiness, tucked inside her coat, where her hand could find it without looking. She drew it out now, and her hand, to her own quiet astonishment, did not shake. This came in September. From Mr. Whitmore. My father's lawyer. She held it up, not handing it over, letting the crowd see the seal, the careful lawyerly hand. It says there are irregularities in how you managed my father's estate. Irregularities you didn't want examined. That's why you came looking for me. Not out of family concern. Her voice hardened. Out of fear I'd expose you. Lies, Victor said, but the word came out thinner than he likely intended. Then explain the barn, Jonas said. Explain Silas Cole, asking questions in this town for a week, before someone set fire to my property. Explain buying my note in secret, through a Denver lawyer, the same week my wife received a letter warning her you were looking for her. Victor's jaw tightened. For the first time, since stepping off that carriage, he had nothing polished to offer. Until a voice spoke up from the edge of the crowd. A man Verity didn't recognize. Thin, tired-looking, his coat as fine as Victor's but worn at the cuffs, the look of a man who'd been paid well once, and not well enough since. I can speak to that. He stepped forward, hat in hand. Name's Everett Pike. Private investigator. Mr. Pratt hired me back in Boston. Paid me to locate Miss Ashford. And paid a man named Cole, through me, to see about discouraging whoever she'd taken up with. His eyes flicked to Victor, and something bitter moved across his face. Was going to keep quiet about it. Man pays me, I don't ask questions past what I'm hired for. But he still owes me 2 months' wages, and I find myself disinclined to protect a man who stiffs his own hired help. The crowd's murmur rose, sharp and disbelieving, and Victor's face had gone the color of old paper. This is absurd, Victor said, too loud now, the performance cracking further, with every word. A disgruntled employee, a hysterical woman, and a rancher, with every motive to invent. I'm not hysterical. Verity's voice cut clean through his. Steady. Louder than she'd known she could be. I'm the woman whose inheritance you stole. Whose face you bruised more times than I could count. Who you would have kept locked in that house until there was nothing left of me to keep. She stepped forward, and the crowd parted slightly to let her, and for the first time in 2 years she stood close enough to Victor Pratt to look him directly in the eye without flinching. I ran because I was afraid of you. I'm done being afraid of you. Victor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to say that the town hadn't already heard. Nothing that could out-argue a lawyer's letter, a hired investigator's confession, and a woman standing in broad daylight refusing, finally, to be quiet. The sheriff, a broad, unhurried man named Cyrus Doyle who'd been standing at the edge of the crowd taking it all in, with the patience of someone who'd learned long ago not to move, until he understood the whole shape of a thing, stepped forward now. Mr. Pratt. I'll be needing you to come with me while we sort this out properly. Fraud's a serious charge, and it sounds like Denver's going to have some questions for you too, given how that note got purchased. You have no authority. I have exactly the authority a Colorado sheriff has when a man's accused of buying arson on American soil. Doyle's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. You're welcome to wire your own lawyer. From the jail. Two of the sheriff's men moved to flank Victor, and for one long moment he simply stood there, gloves still too clean, cane still hanging useless, from one hand. The whole careful architecture of his control finally, completely, collapsed. His eyes found Verity one last time. You'll regret this, he said, quiet now, meant only for her, though half the crowd caught it anyway. You have nothing without me. No name. No money. Nothing. Verity looked at him, really looked, the way she'd never once let herself look at him directly in 2 years of living under his roof, and felt something inside her go entirely, permanently still. I have everything, she said. That's the part you never understood. They led him away. And Silver Creek watched him go in a silence that felt, to Verity, like the very first true quiet she'd known since stepping off that stagecoach the previous September. Not the trembling silence of fear. Something else. Something like the moment, after a held breath finally releases. Ezra Bowman found them an hour later, once the crowd had thinned, once the sheriff's office had swallowed Victor, and the questions that would follow him east. Notes voided, he said, a little breathless, papers in hand. Talked with the judge already. Matters clear enough, given what came out today. A debt purchased through fraud and used to fund arson doesn't stand up in any court in this territory. Your land's clear, Jonas. Free and clear. Jonas didn't say anything for a moment. Just stood in the street, with his hand finding Verity's, gripping it the way a man grips something he genuinely feared losing. Thank you, Ezra. Thank her. Ezra nodded toward Verity, something like respect in his tired eyes. Never seen a body stand up to a man like that in open daylight. Took more nerve than most men in this town could muster. Verity felt heat rise in her cheeks. I had help. All of you. Her eyes moved across the thinning crowd. Amos, the bishops, Mrs. Holloway standing near the church steps, with tears openly on her weathered face. I didn't do that alone. No, Mrs. Holloway said, coming forward, folding Verity into an embrace that smelled of flower and wood smoke and something like home. But you're the one who spoke first, child. Everything after followed because you spoke first. That evening, the ranch felt different in a way Verity couldn't quite name. Not just safe. Something beyond safe. Earned. They sat on the porch, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, scouts sprawled across Jonas's boots, the whole prairie gone gold, and quiet in the dying light, and Verity let herself simply breathe for a while, no letter waiting in a drawer, no threat riding in from Boston. Just the two of them, and the wind moving through the cottonwoods, and a future that finally belonged entirely to her. Spring arrived slow and generous that year, the way it does when a hard winter finally lets go its grip. The rebuilt barn stood solid against the tree line, new wood still pale and unweathered, waiting for time to give it the same warm dignity as everything else on the Callaway ranch. The herd had recovered its numbers. The note was gone, the land clear, and something in the rhythm of the days had settled into a kind of peace neither of them had dared name too loudly, for fear of scaring it off. It was on an April morning, the two of them sitting on the porch steps watching the sunrise paint the fields gold, that Verity finally found the words she'd been carrying for almost 2 weeks. Jonas. I think. She stopped. Started again. Took his hand, and placed it, gentle, against her still flat stomach. I think we might need to make room for another Callaway. Come winter. The stillness that followed lasted only a heartbeat. Then Jonas turned to her, and the look on his face, raw, unguarded, entirely undone, was one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. A baby. His voice came out thick. Verity. A baby. Our baby. He gathered her into his arms, as though she were something impossibly precious, and Verity laughed, actually laughed, bright and unguarded, a sound she hadn't heard from her own throat in longer than she could remember. The months that followed carried a fullness Verity had never let herself imagine. Mrs. Holloway visited often, bringing tiny knitted things, and practical advice delivered, with the same brisk warmth she brought to everything. Jonas grew, if anything, more careful than before, insisting she rest, hiring a local girl named Prue Ackerman to help with the heavier chores, hovering in a way that would have annoyed her from anyone else, and instead only made her feel treasured. "I'm not made of glass," she told him more than once, laughing, as he fretted over whether she should be lifting the water buckets. "No," he agreed, taking the bucket from her hands anyway. "You're made of something a great deal tougher than glass. Doesn't mean I don't want to carry it for you, when I can." By September, a year, almost to the day, since she'd stepped off that stagecoach with bruises hidden beneath her travel dress, her condition was unmistakable, her whole frame changed by the life growing inside her. Mrs. Holloway visited nearly every week now, and one afternoon, shelling peas together on the porch, she studied Verity, with something like wonder. "You're glowing, child. Truly. I never thought I could be this happy," Verity admitted, resting a hand where the baby had just begun to kick, with real conviction. "Some mornings I wake, and I'm almost afraid it's a dream I'll lose." Mrs. Holloway's expression turned serious, steady. "It's not a dream. You earned this. Through more courage than most people find in a lifetime. Don't fear it, child. Hold on to it with both hands." That night, brushing her hair with the silver brush Jonas had given her on their wedding night, Verity caught his eyes in the small mirror. "A year ago," she said softly, "I was bruised and terrified, running from Boston, with nothing but a bag and desperate hope." Jonas came to stand behind her, meeting her gaze in the glass. "And now? Now I have everything I never let myself dream of. A home. A husband who loves me." She turned to face him fully. "A child coming. And a whole town that stood beside us when it mattered most." Jonas pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of the space between them now occupied by their child. "I have you," he murmured against her hair. "My brave, extraordinary Verity." Their son was born on a crisp November night, exactly 1 year to the week since the first snow of their first winter together, as the earliest flakes of the new season drifted past the window. The labor was long. Difficult in the particular way first labors often are, but Verity faced it with the same quiet steel that had carried her through everything since Boston. Mrs. Holloway and the doctor in attendance, Jonas pacing the main room outside the door, unable to sit still, unable to do anything but wait and pray, and wait some more. Shortly after midnight, a son. Robust. Healthy. A thatch of dark hair like his father's, and eyes that, when they briefly opened, showed hints of his mother's blue-green. "Henry," Verity whispered, when they'd placed the swaddled bundle in her arms. "Henry Thomas Calloway." A pause, her voice thick with emotion. "Thomas for your father, Jonas." When Jonas was finally allowed into the room, his face carried worry and hope in equal, overwhelming measure. The sight of Verity, exhausted, radiant, holding their son, brought tears openly to his eyes. "Come meet your son," she said. He approached the bed, with something like reverence, sitting carefully on its edge, reaching out one tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect." His voice broke on the word. "Like his mother." "I named him for your father," Verity said. "I hope it's everything," Jonas said, leaning forward to press his lips to her forehead. "Thank you? For him. For all of it." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady, blanketing the ranch in white, and the new family huddled together in the warmth of a home built not just from wood and stone, but from patience, and honesty, and a courage that had, in the end, saved far more than a single marriage. 5 years passed the way good years do, quickly, and yet each one etched permanently into memory. The Calloway ranch grew steadily, the herd doubling, the house expanded to hold the family that had grown alongside it. Henry, called Little Hank around the ranch, to keep him separate from his father, was joined 2 years later by a sister, Lily Rose, named for the aunt she would never meet, and the grandmother, whose photograph still sat on Verity's dresser. The children thrived in the wide, clean air of the Colorado prairie, their laughter filling rooms that had once known only careful, quiet footsteps. Verity flourished alongside them. The frightened, bruised woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach had become, in the eyes of Silver Creek, a woman respected for her steadiness and her quiet strength, the same woman who'd once stood in the street and faced down the man who'd hurt her, now known just as readily for her skill with a rifle, her steady hand with the ranch ledgers, her generosity toward any family in the county who fell on hard times, remembering always how much a barn full of neighbors had once meant to her own. On a warm evening in the summer of 1881, Verity and Jonas sat together on the expanded porch, watching Hank and Lily Rose chase Scout's grown litter of puppies across the yard, their laughter rising bright against the gold evening light. "What are you thinking about?" Jonas asked, his arms settling around her waist. "Something my father used to say," Verity said. "Sometimes the longest journey is the one from fear to love." A soft smile. "I didn't understand what he meant until I came here. Until I found you." Jonas turned to look at her, his eyes still the same worn, weathered blue as the day they'd met, though the years of sun and work had carved new lines around them. Lines that only made him, to Verity's eyes, more handsome than ever. "I found you too," he said quietly. "When you arrived, with those bruises hidden under your dress, I was furious at whoever had hurt you. But grateful, too. In a strange way." "Grateful?" "That you'd found your way here. To Silver Creek. To me." He took her hand, his thumb brushing the simple gold band he'd placed there nearly 6 years before. "I think I was waiting for you, Verity. Even before I knew you existed." Verity smiled, remembering the frightened young woman she'd been, that first September, marveling at the distance she'd traveled. Not in miles, though there had been plenty of those, but in something far harder to measure. "And I was looking for you," she said. "Even when I didn't know it was you I needed." In the yard, Hank called out, with delight as one of the puppies knocked him gently off his feet, his laughter mingling with his sister's to fill the evening air with something like music. Jonas's lips found hers in a kiss that, even after all these years, still made her pulse quicken. "I love you, Verity Calloway," he murmured against her mouth. "More today than yesterday. Less than tomorrow." As twilight settled soft and golden over the Colorado prairie, Verity rested in the circle of her husband's arms, surrounded by the family, and the home they had built together, deliberately, out of nothing but patience and courage, and a stubborn refusal to let fear have the final word. The bruises that had once marked her body were long since healed. The memories of what she'd fled had faded like old photographs, present still, but no longer able to reach into the life she'd made. In their place stood something she had never quite let herself believe she'd find, standing on that dusty street in Silver Creek almost 6 years before. Not just an escape. Not just safety. A home. A family. A life entirely, finally, her own.